Welcome to the world of sci-fi stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. The SOS that summoned humanity's most lethal fleet. The SOS is sent the space station Orion 9 floated silently in the endless dark of the galaxy far from any known civilization. It was a quiet outpost. With only a few people stationed there, the crew of Orion 9 had long ago grown used to the calm and isolation. It was a peaceful job monitoring space traffic, maintaining communication systems, and making sure everything stayed running smoothly. Captain Reines sat in the command center, her eyes glued to the console in front of her. She was reviewing routine messages, making sure nothing out of the ordinary was happening. It was just another quiet evening, but then something caught her attention. A strange signal appeared on the screen. At first it looked like a glitch, a random burst of static, but then the shape of the signal became clearer. It wasn't just random noise, it was a message. The message had an unmistakable pattern, a repeating signal that sounded like an SOS. But that wasn't the oddest part. The signal was ancient, sent from a part of the galaxy that hadn't been explored in centuries. It was as if the message had been traveling through the vast emptiness of space for years, waiting to be found. Reynolds frowned as she examined the details. The signal was unmistakably human. She could tell from the structure of the message and the patterns used. But why was it coming from a forgotten planet, one that had been abandoned long ago? She quickly forwarded the message to the rest of the crew. They had to act fast. Something didn't feel right. "We received a distress signal," she said, her voice steady, but with a hint of concern. "It's from a lost colony, Fearless 3. There's no record of anyone living there for over a century, but the signal, it's human." Her first officer, Jack, stared at the screen. But Captain, if this colony has been abandoned for that long, why is this signal just showing up now?" Reynolds had no answer for that, but she had a bad feeling in her gut. "Send a message back. See if we can get any more details." Jax worked quickly, typing commands into his console. He attempted to send a simple reply, just a question asking for more information. But there was no response, only the same repeating SOS signal growing stronger by the second. It was like the sender was desperately trying to be heard. Something didn't add up. If this was an old distress signal, why hadn't it been received before now? And why was it coming from Fearless 3, a planet that the Federation had long since given up on? There was no reason for anyone to be out there, yet the signal was clear. "Captain, this doesn't make sense," Jack said, his voice filled with doubt. "If it's a distress call, we should send help. But if it's been out there for so long, why didn't anyone else pick it up before us?" Rio leaned back in her chair, thinking. The possibilities raced through her mind. Could this be a trap? Could someone be trying to lure them into a dangerous situation? Or maybe it wasn't a trap at all. Maybe it was a call for help from someone who had been stranded, waiting to be rescued. "Send a fleet out to Fearless 3. Reynolds ordered. "We can't ignore this. Prepare for a mission." Jax hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Yes, Captain." As the crew scrambled to prepare the ship, Captain Reynolds remained at the command center, staring at the screen. The signal continued to pulse, growing stronger, more insistent. It felt like it was calling directly to her, urging her to make a decision. She knew she couldn't ignore it. But there was a nagging feeling deep in her chest. Something was wrong, and she couldn't shake the thought that responding to this SOS might set something into motion, something they weren't prepared for. Meanwhile, on the distant planet Fearless 3, something ancient and powerful stirred. The message had been sent, and soon someone would come to investigate. But what would they find? The planet had long since been abandoned, its cities now overgrown and forgotten, yet there were still signs of life, strange hidden forces moving in the shadows. Forces that had been waiting for centuries. The crew of Orion 9 had no idea what they were walking into. They thought they were responding to a simple distress call, but this was no ordinary SOS. It was a warning, and as they traveled toward the unknown, they would soon realize that the message wasn't just a cry for help, it was a summons. And who or what was waiting for them? As the crew readied themselves to leave Orion 9, Captain Reynolds' mind raced. She had no idea that answering this call for help would soon plunge them into a war against an enemy they didn't even know existed. The Death Worlders were coming, And they weren't just any enemy, they were the fiercest, most relentless force in the galaxy, and now the crew of Orion 9 had unknowingly called them to war. The signal's origin: the crew of Orion 9 worked tirelessly to prepare for their journey to Fearless 3 as they gathered their supplies and made final preparations. Captain Rennell couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into something dangerous. The signal had only intensified, and now there was no turning back. Her duty was to investigate and respond to the SOS, but part of her questioned whether it was the right decision. As the ship's engines roared to life, they entered hyperspace, the stars stretching into streaks of light. The journey to Fearless 3 would take several days, but Rannell felt the weight of those days bearing down on her. She spent much of her time alone in her quarters, staring at the map of the galaxy. Fearless 3 was in a remote part of the galaxy, far from any major trade routes or settlements. It was like it had been forgotten. The old colony had been established centuries ago, but no one had heard of it since. The last official report stated that the colony had failed due to harsh conditions, and the planet had been marked as uninhabitable. That was the last anyone had known about Fearless 3. So why was there a human SOS coming from there? Now Rael sat back in her chair, scanning over the data again. The more she read, the more questions arose. The message wasn't just any distress call. It seemed to be a specific request. The SOS contained coordinates, exact locations within the planet's vast desert region, as if whoever had sent it had known exactly who would hear it and where to find them. "Captain, we've got a problem," Jax's voice echoed through the comm system, snapping Rennell from her thoughts. He sounded troubled. Rennell quickly opened the comm channel. "What is it, Jax?" "We've decoded some of the signal's hidden data," Jax began, his tone uneasy. "It's a message encoded in an ancient language we can't fully translate, but there's one word that keeps coming up, repeating over and over." Rel's heart skipped a beat. "What word?" Jax hesitated for a moment. "Deathworlders," the word hit Rennell like a hammer. Deathworlders, the terrifying species from a distant and hostile part of the galaxy. They were legendary for their ruthless survival skills and immense strength. No one knew exactly where they came from, but stories of their ferocity and merciless nature were whispered in every corner of the galaxy. They were the stuff of nightmares. "Are you sure?" Raniel asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes," Jax replied. "The message is clear, Captain. Whoever sent this SOS wasn't just calling for help, they were warning us. This isn't a simple distress signal. It's a summons." Rennell's mind raced. Could it be true? Could the Deathworlders be involved? Fearless 3 was supposed to be an abandoned planet. But if the Deathworlders were involved, that would change everything. Why would they be coming to a forgotten colony? What did they want? "Keep analyzing the message," Rennell ordered. "We need to know more about what we're dealing with." As the crew continued their work, the hours stretched on. The ship sped through the blackness of space toward a planet that had been hidden for so long. Rennell had hoped the journey would give her time to process everything, but instead, the closer they got to Fearless 3, the more questions arose. What had happened to the original colonists on Fearless 3, and why had they been abandoned? Were the Deathworlders involved in the colony's downfall? Or was there something more at play here, a power even greater than the Deathworlders themselves? With every passing moment, the crew of Orion 9 grew more uncertain. They had entered uncharted territory, and the deeper they traveled, the more they realized they didn't fully understand what they were up against. The planet loomed large on the view screen now. Fearless 3 was a desolate world with vast stretches of barren deserts, ancient ruins, and nothing more. No signs of life. No signs of anything out of the ordinary. But that was before the SOS had been discovered. Jax's voice came through again, his tone more urgent this time. "Captain, we've detected something. There's an enormous fleet approaching from the planet's atmosphere. They're not human." Rennell's heart sank. "The Deathworlders, they were here. What's their size?" she demanded. Jax checked the readings. "It's hard to say, Captain, but from what we can see, it's massive, and it's heading straight for us." The crew braced themselves. They hadn't even landed on the planet yet, and already they were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. But what were the Deathworlders doing here, and why were they coming after the crew of Orion 9? Rennell had no answers. But she knew one thing for sure: whatever the planet Feralus 3 held, it was about to change everything. Death Worlder fleet approaches the Orion. Slowly approached Feralus 3, its engines humming quietly in the vast emptiness of space. The planet now filled the view screen, a dusty, barren world that looked as though it hadn't changed in centuries. Its pale surface was marked by scars of long-forgotten battles and the remains of ancient cities now lost to time. But the crew's attention was not on the planet's surface. Their eyes were fixed on the growing fleet appearing in the distance like dark shadows creeping closer in. Wasn't just one or two ships. It was an entire armada, a fleet of massive, heavily armed warships, unlike anything they had ever seen. The Orion 9 was a science station, not a warship. It was no match for the Dora fleet. Captain Reynolds stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. Her worst fears were coming true. The Death Worlders were here. Jax, her first officer, was silent for a long moment. The fleet's size was staggering. It seemed like an endless line of ships, all moving with a terrifying, purposeful grace. Captain Jack said, his voice low, This is beyond anything we've ever faced before. The Death Worlders aren't known for their mercy." Ral nodded grimly. "I know, I've heard the stories, but why now? What could they possibly want?" With Feralus 3, the crew had been preparing for an encounter, but this was nothing like what they had imagined. It wasn't just a skirmish, it was an invasion. The Death Worlders had never been seen in this part of the galaxy before, and certainly never on a planet that was supposedly abandoned. "We need to find out what's on that planet," Randall said, her voice with determination. "If this planet is important enough to bring the Death Worlders here, then we need to know why." As the Orion neared Feralus 3, the fleet moved into a defensive formation, their ships positioned like a ring around the planet. It was a clear sign that they were preparing for something, waiting for something. Randall turned to her crew. "Prepare the away team. We're going to the surface." The crew had no idea what they would find when they landed. All they knew was that the planet had been abandoned for a century, and the SOS signal had come from somewhere deep within the ruins, somewhere no one had dared to venture before. As they descended into the atmosphere, Randall could feel the tension in the air. The entire crew was on edge, knowing that whatever awaited them below could change everything. The Death Worlders had arrived, and they weren't here to make friends. The descent was smooth, but the moment they broke through the clouds, the crew saw the ruins below. Massive structures that once looked like grand cities now lay in ruins, half buried by the sand. It was as if nature had reclaimed the land, erasing any trace of human civilization. But there were strange symbols scattered across the landscape, markings that seemed to belong to no known species. "Land near the ruins," Randall ordered. "We need to get to the source of the signal." The ship touched down on the desolate planet, the dust swirling around them. The crew disembarked, their boots crunching against the dry, cracked ground. The air was thin and dry, and the distant sound of the Death Worlder fleet hanging in orbit over them was a constant reminder of the danger they were in. As they made their way toward the ruins, Renel's thoughts raced. Why had this planet been abandoned? What had happened to the original colonists? And what exactly had they discovered here that could draw the Death Worlders to this forgotten world? The ruins were massive, far larger than anything the crew had seen before. They seemed to stretch on for miles, towering structures that had once been bustling cities, now reduced to rubble. It felt like they were walking through a ghost town, empty, silent, and foreboding. They reached the heart of the ruins, where the signal had originated from. It led them to a massive underground facility, its entrance hidden beneath layers of sand and debris. The door was sealed shut, but the crew managed to pry it open with ease. Inside, the air was cool, a sharp contrast to the burning heat outside. The walls of the facility were covered in strange marking symbols that didn't make sense. They seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if they were alive. Jack stepped forward, his voice a whisper. "Captain, this doesn't feel right." Rail looked around. The facility was ancient, its technology far beyond anything the crew had encountered, but what caught her attention was the center of the room. In the middle, the large glowing sphere sat on a pedestal, radiating the soft pulsating light. It hummed quietly, almost like a heartbeat. The crew gathered around it, unsure of what they were looking at. It wasn't just technology, it felt like something more, something alive. "This is it," Renell whispered. "This is why the Death Worlders are here." But before they could investigate further, a loud noise echoed from behind them. The door to the facility slammed shut, trapping them. Inside, the sound of heavy footsteps approach, and Rennell knew instantly who it was. The Death Worlders had found them. They had only just begun to uncover the secrets of Fearless 3, and already they were out of time. The Death Worlders were closing in. The Death Worlders' arrival, the air in the underground facility was thick with tension as the crew of Orion 9 stood frozen. The door had slammed shut behind them, and the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder with each passing second. Rennell felt her heartbeat quicken. They had come here to investigate a signal, a simple SOS, but now they were trapped on a forgotten planet surrounded by strange technology and faced with the deadly arrival of the Death Worlders. "Captain, we need to get out of here," Jax whispered urgently, his eyes scanning the shadows. The footsteps were getting closer. Rennell glanced around quickly. The facility had once been a hub of activity, but now, with the walls crumbling and the strange glowing orb at the center, it felt like an ancient tomb. She could sense the presence of something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. "Stay calm," Rennell said in a low, controlled voice. "We need to find another exit. Don't engage unless we absolutely have to." But it was already too late. The Death Worlders had arrived. Their presence undeniable. The facile dim lighting flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls outside. The sounds of their ships landing reverberated through the ground, shaking the very foundation of the ancient structure. The ground trembled with the force of their arrival, and the crew knew there was no escape. Without confronting them, a voice deep and guttural echoed through the corridor, sending a chill down Rill's spine. "We have come for what is ours." Rill exchanged a look with her crew. The Death Worlders were not here to negotiate. They weren't interested in diplomacy. They had come for something specific, something that had brought them across the stars to this desolate planet. "I think it's safe to assume they want the orb," Jax muttered, his voice tense. "It must be what triggered the ASOS." Rennell nodded. The orb, glowing with an otherworldly energy, was unlike anything they had ever seen. It pulsed as if alive, its light bathing the crew in an eerie glow. Whatever the Death Worlders were after, it was tied to this ancient relic, and it seemed to be a source of immense power. Before they could act, the heavy metal door at the far end of the room slammed open, revealing the towering forms of the Death Worlders. They moved like shadows, their massive figures barely fitting through the doorway. The Deworlders were formidable, their presence overwhelming. They wore armor that seemed to absorb the light around them, and their eyes, red and glowing, pierced through the dimly lit room. The crew was no match for them. Rennell's heart raced. She had heard the rumors, the stories of these fearsome beings, but seeing them up close was a different experience entirely. The Death Worlders weren't just brutal warriors. They were like a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. The leader of the Death Worlder stepped forward, his voice deep and terrifying. "Give us the relic," he growled, his eyes narrowing at the glowing orb. Now Rell didn't have to think twice. She knew they were outgunned, outmatched, but they couldn't just hand over the relic. They had no idea what it could do or why the Death Worlders were so desperate to claim it could change everything. And she wasn't about to let it fall into the hands of a species like the Death Worlders without understanding its true power. "We don't know what this is," Rell said, her voice steady but firm. "But we're not giving it to you," the Death Worlder leader snarled. "You do not understand. We do not ask for permission, we take." With a swift motion, the leader raised a weapon, a massive energy-based rifle, and aimed it at Rennell. The crew instinctively took a step back, their hands hovering near their weapons. It was clear the Death Worlders weren't here to negotiate. Rennell's mind raced. There was no time to waste. They couldn't win a fight against the Death Worlders. They had to think of something else, something that would buy them time or give them a chance to escape. Suddenly, she had an idea. "Wait," Rennell called, holding her hand up to stop the Death Worlders. "You said this relic is yours. What do you mean?" The Death Worlder leader glowing eyes narrowed. "It is the key to our power. It belongs to our people. You have no idea what you're holding." Rennell glanced at the orbit hummed softly, almost like it was responding to the leader's words. She had to buy more time. She needed answers. You're right, she said carefully. We don't know what this is, but if it's so important, why was it left here? Why was it hidden for so long? The leader seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if considering her question. The relic was hidden because it is dangerous. The galaxy cannot know its true power. We were forced to hide it to keep it safe from those who would use it to destroy us. Now it calls to us. You should not have come. Real's mind spun. If the Deathworlders were this desperate to reclaim the orb, it had to be something of unimaginable importance. But what if the true danger wasn't the orb itself? But what would happen if the Deathworlders used it? The leader's patience was running thin. Enough talking. Give us the relic. Suddenly, the room was filled with the harsh hum of weapons being powered up. The crew was surrounded. There was no way out. Renel's eyes locked onto the orb, and she realized that the key to their survival and the fate of the galaxy was in her hands. She had one choice: hand it over and surrender to the Deathworlders, or find a way to stop them from unleashing the power of the orb. The countdown had begun, unraveling the mystery. The tension in the room was unbearable. Rael stood frozen, staring at the glowing orb that now seemed like the only thing standing between her crew and certain death. The Deathworlders had made their demands clear. Their weapons were raised, ready to strike. The crew of Orion 9 was trapped, cornered in a room with no easy escape, but R wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Listen to me, Rael said, her voice steady but filled with determination. We don't understand what this is, but we are not your enemies. We're only trying to understand the truth. If you can tell us why this relic is so important to you, maybe we can find a way to help you. The Deworlder leader's eyes narrowed, glowing with cold fury. Help, he growled. There is no helping you. You've made a grave mistake by keeping it from us. Rel's mind raced. If she handed over the orb, they would have no way of stopping the Deathworlders from using it. But if they kept it, they risked provoking a war that could spread across the galaxy. She needed to buy more time. She needed to understand what the orb was, what it could do, and why it mattered so much to the Deathworlders. She glanced at the orb again, its faint glow pulsing rhythmically, as if it were alive. There had to be more to this relic than met the eye, and as she looked at it, something strange happened. The orb seemed to respond to her gaze. It flickered, its light shifting almost as if it were reacting to her presence. Before she could think any further, Jack stepped forward, his voice urgent. Captain, look at this. He had noticed something that Renel hadn't. On the pedestal beneath the orb were faint, almost imperceptible carvings. They appeared to be in an ancient script, one the crew hadn't seen before. It was clear that the orb wasn't just a powerful artifact. It was also a key to something much larger. Renel motioned for Jax to bring up a translation device, hoping that it could decipher the markings. As the device scanned the symbols, a faint holographic projection appeared above the pedestal. The projection showed images of an ancient civilization, one that had long since vanished. It was a race of beings that looked nothing like humans or Deathworlders. Their bodies elegant and streamlined, almost ethereal. The projection flickered and zoomed in on an image of the orb itself. The symbols around it seemed to indicate that the orb was not just a relic of power, it was a weapon, one capable of controlling vast forces of nature, even space itself. This is beyond anything we've ever known, Jax said, his voice AED and frightened at the same time. This relic isn't just a tool, it's a weapon of unimaginable power. It called. Suddenly, the Deathworlder leader roared, interrupting Jax, enough of your lies. Give it to us now. Renel held up a hand, signaling her crew to stand down. She could feel the room closing in around them. They were running out of time. But she needed to know more. Wait, Renel shouted, you don't understand. The orb isn't just yours to take. It was hidden away for a reason. The leader paused, his sharp gaze fixed on her. Hidden away? You think you know better than we do. Real stood her ground. No, but what if I told you that the reason it was hidden is because it's not just a weapon, it's a prison for something even worse than you. The leader's expression faltered for a fraction of a second, just enough for Renel to notice. She pressed on. You came here for this, or because you believe it's a weapon. But what if it's something much more dangerous than you realize? What if it's holding back something that could destroy not just you, but everyone? The leader's posture shifted slightly, as though he was considering her words, but his voice was still laced with anger. You dare to lecture us on what this is, you know. Nothing of the ancient civilizations that came before you. We have guarded this weapon for millennia. It was never meant to be hidden. It is our birthright. It was meant to destroy the enemies of our people. Rel's mind was racing. There was more to this than just a fight over an ancient relic. The Deathworlders had clearly been searching for this orb for centuries, but the way they spoke about it, it wasn't just an object of power. It was a key, and it held a secret they didn't understand. What if it's holding back a greater threat? Renal asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. What if the relic is not just a weapon, but a seal holding something inside, a creature, or a force so powerful that if you release it, it could destroy you? The Deathworlder leader's eyes widened for the briefest moment before narrowing again. You are trying to trick us, he spat. I'm not, Renal said. I'm telling you the truth. This relic wasn't created to give power. It was created to imprison something that's been locked away for so long that even you, with all your power, could never control it. We need to learn more about it before we do something irreversible. A moment of silence passed. Then the Deathworlder leader stepped closer, his face inches from Renal's. If you are lying, you will die here, and I will make sure the galaxy knows your name. But if you speak the truth, we might have a much greater war to fight, a war against something far more dangerous than any enemy we faced. Rel swallowed.